At 18, Seraphine Holt stood alone, beneath a sky that seemed too wide for anyone with nowhere left to belong. Cast out by her late father's business partner after he forged papers, claiming the small homestead had never belonged to her family, carrying only $4.80 wrapped inside a faded handkerchief. And with those last coins, she did the one thing every sensible soul in Dry Mesa Crossing, New Mexico territory, believed no desperate girl should ever do. She purchased an abandoned desert windmill that leaned above a forgotten well on the edge of the salt flats, a place everyone insisted had been cursed by drought and silence for nearly 40 years, never imagining that beneath its rusted water tank rested something carefully hidden that would not merely change the course of her own life, but quietly breathe hope back into an entire forgotten settlement. Settle in and let us tell you the story of Seraphine Holt. If you're watching from a place that feels forgotten, tell us in the comments, because sometimes forgotten places remember the greatest stories. Seraphine had entered the world during one of those desert mornings, when the first sunlight painted every distant mesa with copper and gold, and though she never remembered her mother, who passed before her second birthday, she grew beneath the steady guidance of her father, Edwin Holt, a wheelwright whose hands understood wood the way musicians understand melodies. We often believe children inherit wealth through coins or deeds, yet the truest inheritance arrives through habits patiently repeated, and Edwin never finished a day's work without inviting his daughter to stand beside him, asking not merely whether something worked, but whether it would still work after 20 winters had tested it. While other children chased jackrabbits across the scrubland, Seraphine learned how cedar grain twisted beneath a plane, how iron bolts expanded beneath summer heat, how old gears could whisper their troubles long before they finally broke. Dry Mesa Crossing was hardly more than a cluster of weathered storefronts gathered around a dusty crossroads where freight wagons paused between larger settlements, but its people carried themselves with quiet determination. Every family depended upon another in ways outsiders rarely noticed. The blacksmith repaired the rancher's plows before accepting payment because harvest came later. The baker left loaves outside widows' doors before dawn without announcing who had paid for them. Even children fetched water for elderly neighbors without expecting thanks. Edwin often reminded Seraphine that communities survived not because everyone prospered together, but because no one allowed another to disappear unnoticed. Their modest cabin overlooked shallow desert washes that remained dry most months yet, suddenly filled with roaring water after distant storms. Edwin taught her never to judge the worth of anything by how it appeared in a single season. The brittle mesquite still sheltered birds. The cracked earth still remembered rain. An abandoned wheel could spin again if someone understood why it had stopped. On evenings scented with sage after rare rainfall, father and daughter climbed a nearby ridge where an aging windmill turned with a slow metallic sigh above a rancher's well. Edwin pointed toward its blades, catching sunset winds, and explained that every machine existed to serve someone unseen. Travelers admired the spinning wheel, but the wheel itself cared only about lifting water hidden beneath stone. "Remember this," he once told her, while tightening an old bolt with deliberate care. "The most important work is often invisible." Those words settled deep inside Seraphine, long before she understood how completely they would shape her future. When she turned 16, Edwin accepted occasional repair jobs beyond Dry Mesa Crossing, restoring irrigation pumps, wagon axles, abandoned mills, and forgotten machinery others considered beyond saving. Seraphine accompanied him whenever she could, observing not only broken equipment but broken spirits. Ranchers who believed a failed well meant the end of generations. Farmers convinced one harsh season had erased every possibility ahead. Edwin always approached both people and machines the same way. He listened first. Then came the autumn fever. It arrived quietly, with cooler nights, and carried away several townsfolk before anyone recognized its danger. Edwin worked, despite growing weaker, because neighboring families depended upon promised repairs before winter. By the time Seraphine persuaded him to rest, the fever had already settled too deeply. His final days were gentle but painfully brief. He asked for no doctor who could not arrive in time. Instead, he asked his daughter to open every workshop window so desert air could drift through the room, scented with cedar shavings and linseed oil. He never spoke of money. He never spoke of fear. He only repeated the lesson he had offered beside countless worn machines. Look beneath what everyone else sees. When dawn finally arrived without his breathing, Seraphine buried not merely her father, but the only person who had ever treated her as entirely capable. At first, the town gathered around her with kindness. Meals appeared upon her porch. Neighbors repaired loose fencing. The pastor offered quiet encouragement. Yet kindness cannot always withstand determined greed. Edwin's longtime business associate, Calvin Mercer, arrived carrying documents, sealed with impressive signatures and solemn expressions. He insisted Edwin had owed substantial debts from failed contracts and unpaid supplies. According to the papers, every remaining possession, including the workshop, cabin, and surrounding acreage, belonged legally to him. Seraphine protested. The figures made no sense. The handwriting seemed unfamiliar. But 18-year-old girls rarely prevailed against confident older businessmen who carried stamped documents and spoke with practiced certainty. Within weeks, the county office accepted Mercer's claim. Neighbors whispered doubts, yet feared challenging legal authority. The workshop where she had spent nearly every childhood afternoon was emptied. Her father's tools vanished into wagons. The cabin door closed behind strangers. Seraphine walked away carrying one satchel, one blanket, her father's pocket compass, and $4.80 that Mercer dismissed as charity rather than obligation. As she crossed the edge of town, she refused to look back. Not because she felt no grief, because she feared she might never gather the strength to keep walking if she did. She followed the old wagon road until even the wagon ruts disappeared beneath drifting sand. The desert possessed a silence unlike any forest or mountain. It was not empty, it simply waited. The wind carried grains of pale dust across the ground, with patient determination, polishing stone after stone until every sharp edge surrendered. Seraphine found herself wondering whether people were shaped much the same way, not by one great hardship, but by thousands of smaller moments that slowly changed them into someone stronger than they had expected to become. Near sunset, she climbed a low ridge and saw the abandoned windmill standing alone against the western sky. Even from a distance, it appeared weary. Its once proud blades hung unevenly. Rust covered nearly every exposed bolt. The wooden tower leaned just enough to make any careful observer uneasy. Beside it stood a circular water tank, raised upon thick timber supports, whose boards had faded almost silver beneath decades of relentless sunlight. The old well beneath had supplied water to travelers long before the railroad shifted trade routes farther north, leaving this lonely crossing abandoned. Most people hurried past the place without even glancing toward it. They believed it had already given everything it ever could. Yet Seraphine remembered her father's quiet words. Look beneath what everyone else sees. The owner proved easier to find than she expected. Elias Dunn, nearly 80 years old and almost blind, occupied a weather-beaten ranch several miles away. He laughed softly when she asked about purchasing the forgotten windmill. You've seen it? I have. And you still want it? If you'll sell it. He studied her face for a long moment before shaking his head with disbelief. Child, I've tried giving that place away for 20 years. Folks say the well went dry. They say lightning cursed the tower. They say men disappeared out there chasing foolish dreams. Stories grow taller than cactus around lonely places. Are the stories true? I don't rightly know. He smiled sadly. I only know nobody stayed long enough to find out. He searched through an old desk, finally uncovering a brittle deed covered in dust. $4.80 is all you've got? She nodded. Then $4.80 it'll be. She unfolded the worn handkerchief, carefully counting every coin upon his kitchen table. When the last penny rested beside the others, her pockets were empty. In exchange, Elias slid the faded deed across the wood. There, he whispered. You've bought yourself more trouble than shelter. Perhaps, Seraphine answered, folding the document carefully. Or perhaps I've bought something nobody remembered how to see. The old rancher chuckled. Your father used to say things like that. She looked up sharply. You knew Edwin Holt? Knew him? Fixed wagons together once or twice. Honest man. Elias's expression darkened. Was sorry to hear how things turned out. He said nothing more, but his silence carried sympathy deeper than many speeches. The first night beneath the windmill proved colder than she expected. She spread her blanket beneath the elevated water tank, where the heavy wooden floor blocked much of the wind. Coyotes called from distant ridges, while the rusted blades above creaked whenever stronger gusts crossed the desert. Sleep arrived in scattered pieces rather than full hours. At dawn, she examined every beam, every bolt, every weathered plank. Her father's lessons guided her hands automatically. Never trust appearances. Listen before repairing. She circled the tower 3 separate times before climbing cautiously upward. Several steps threatened to crumble beneath her boots, yet the structure remained sturdier than it first appeared. Someone long ago had built it with uncommon skill. The water tank itself still held a shallow layer of murky rainwater collected through forgotten seasons. She emptied it with battered buckets until only damp boards remained. Then she inspected the iron pump connected to the well below. Rust covered nearly every surface, but rust alone did not mean failure. She spent 3 days cleaning gears with sand and scraps of cloth. She straightened bent rods using stones as improvised anvils. She carved replacement pegs from mesquite branches. By the 4th afternoon, the windmill's blades managed half a turn before stopping again with a protesting groan. It felt like progress. Late that evening, she noticed something peculiar. The tank's circular wooden floor should have rested evenly upon its supporting beams. Instead, one section sounded different beneath her footsteps. She tapped each board with the handle of her father's pocket knife. Most answered with a dull, solid thump. One answered with a hollow echo. Seraphine knelt immediately. The board appeared identical to every other plank except for faint scratches surrounding 2 rusted nails. They were not carpenter's marks. They looked more like repeated attempts to pry the board loose. Someone had opened this section before. But why? She searched until sunset for any hidden latch, yet found none. The nails refused to move. The following morning, she fashioned a crude lever from an old iron rod discarded beside the tower. Working patiently, careful not to split the aged wood, she loosened one nail, then another. The board lifted only an inch before catching against something beneath. Her pulse quickened. She reached into the narrow gap and brushed away decades of packed dust. Her fingertips touched smooth metal. Not stone, not timber, metal. She widened the opening enough to glimpse the corner of an iron box no larger than a family Bible. Its surface carried almost no rust despite the years. That alone puzzled her. She carefully lifted the surprisingly heavy container into daylight. No lock, no keyhole, only a brass plate engraved with words nearly erased by time. She rubbed away grime using the edge of her sleeve. 3 words slowly emerged. For honest hands. Nothing more. No owner's name, no date, no explanation. She stared at the box for several minutes before opening it. Inside rested neither gold nor jewels. Instead, she found a tightly rolled oilcloth bundle, still perfectly dry despite the passing decades. Beneath it lay a brass compass, far finer than any she had ever seen, a leather-bound notebook tied with blue ribbon now faded almost gray, and a small linen pouch containing 7 unusually polished silver coins stamped with markings unfamiliar to her. Most people would have felt disappointment. 7 coins could never justify years of secrecy. Yet Seraphine sensed immediately that whoever hid the box had valued the papers more than the money. She untied the ribbon. The notebook opened reluctantly. The first page bore careful handwriting. If these pages are found before justice has been done, then the desert has kept my promise longer than I ever wished. Seraphine read the sentence twice. Outside, the evening wind strengthened, turning the repaired blades just enough to produce a slow, rhythmic creak above her. She continued reading. My name is Nathaniel Ashcombe. I was appointed surveyor for the High Basin Water Commission in the spring of 1871. What I discovered was never meant to remain hidden. She stopped breathing for a moment. Surveyor. Water Commission. This was no ordinary diary. Each page carried detailed observations, measurements, sketches of surrounding valleys, and repeated references to underground aquifers stretching beneath much of Dry Mesa Crossing. Then came names, town officials, railroad investors, land agents. Besides several entries, Nathaniel had written only one word: lies. The notebook hinted that enormous quantities of fresh groundwater existed beneath land declared permanently dry. Someone powerful had deliberately buried that truth. Seraphine closed the book slowly. The windmill no longer seemed abandoned by accident. Someone had wanted this place forgotten, and beneath the fading sunlight of the New Mexico desert, with only the whispering wind for company, she realized she was holding the beginning of a secret far greater than her own stolen inheritance. The notebook consumed the next 3 evenings. Seraphine read each page slowly beside a lantern assembled from an old jar and scraps of wire she discovered in the abandoned tool shed near the windmill. Nathaniel Ashcombe had possessed the precise habits of a surveyor, recording distances, elevations, rainfall, rock formations, and conversations with remarkable care. Yet somewhere near the middle of the journal, the neat measurements gave way to hurried entries written with increasing urgency. He described drilling exploratory shafts across the valley while serving the High Basin Water Commission. Beneath layers of sandstone and clay, his team had uncovered an immense underground aquifer stretching for miles beneath the desert. According to his calculations, the hidden reservoir could provide enough clean water to support farms, ranches, orchards, and every family from Dry Mesa Crossing to the distant mesas. Instead of celebrating the discovery, several commissioners reacted with unusual silence. Within weeks, they ordered all official records destroyed. Nathaniel refused. He secretly copied every survey, every map, and every measurement before hiding the originals. He feared powerful railroad investors had purchased vast stretches of nearby land for almost nothing after spreading stories that the region would never sustain permanent settlement. If the existence of the underground water became public, worthless desert would become priceless farmland overnight. Men already holding enormous land claims would profit beyond imagination, while ordinary settlers remained poor unless someone exposed the deception before ownership became permanent. Seraphine reached the final page with trembling hands. "If I disappear before delivering these records," Nathaniel had written, "let whoever finds them remember this, above all else. Water belongs first to those who thirst, not those who speculate. If honesty survives longer than I do, perhaps this valley may yet bloom." The oilcloth bundle suddenly seemed far more important than the notebook itself. She untied its weathered cord. Inside lay folded maps unlike any she had ever seen. They showed underground channels branching beneath the desert, like veins beneath skin. Every spring, seep, and buried stream had been marked in faded blue ink. Small symbols indicated drilling locations along with handwritten notes describing water depth and flow rates. One location rested directly beneath the abandoned windmill. Seraphine spread the largest map across the wooden floor. A second sheet slipped loose. At first she believed it another survey. Then she noticed names. Dozens of names. Families, widows, homesteaders, freedmen, immigrant farmers. Each name appeared beside a parcel of land already divided into modest holdings. Nathaniel had prepared an entirely different future for the valley. His proposal would have distributed access to the underground water fairly among ordinary settlers rather than wealthy investors. Across the bottom, someone had stamped the proposal. Rejected. No explanation followed. Only rejection. The brass compass suddenly made sense as well. Its outer ring twisted open, revealing an impossibly thin rolled document hidden inside the casing. Seraphine carefully eased it free. It was a letter addressed not to any official, but simply, "To the first honest soul who finds this." She unfolded it with extraordinary care. Nathaniel explained that he trusted no courthouse and no commission. Before rumors of his investigation spread, he had hidden certified copies of every survey beneath the water tank, because travelers rarely questioned abandoned wells. He believed someone honest might someday restore the truth after corruption consumed those responsible. His final sentence lingered longest. Do not seek revenge. Seek restoration. The land has already suffered enough. The words echoed Edwin Holt's teachings so closely that Seraphine found tears gathering before she realized she had begun crying. For the first time since losing her father, she felt as though another voice had reached across decades to place a steady hand upon her shoulder. Morning arrived with unusual purpose. Rather than rushing into town with the discovery, she considered everything carefully. If powerful men had buried this truth once, they could certainly attempt it again. She first needed proof that Nathaniel's maps remained accurate. The windmill itself might provide that answer. She resumed repairing the ancient pumping mechanism with renewed determination. The main drive shaft still resisted turning freely despite her earlier work. She dismantled the gearbox entirely, cleaning every tooth with patient precision. Beneath hardened grease, she discovered engraved initials matching those inside Nathaniel's notebook. The surveyor had evidently repaired the machinery himself decades earlier. Late on the 6th afternoon, a stronger desert wind swept across the ridge. The blades turned, one slow revolution, then another. Rust groaned. Wood shuddered. The connecting rod descended. A deep, hollow sound echoed from the well below. Nothing happened. Then another rotation. Another. Suddenly, the ancient pump coughed. A muddy stream burst from the outlet pipe before stopping. Seraphine laughed aloud despite herself. Again the blades turned. Again the pump worked. This time clearer water splashed into the empty tank. Not much. Only a thin, steady ribbon. But it continued. Minute after minute. By sunset, nearly 6 inches of clean water shimmered inside the weathered tank, reflecting the crimson sky above. She knelt beside it in disbelief. The well had never gone dry. It had merely been abandoned after the machinery failed. The stories had survived longer than the truth. Over the next week, she cleared thorn brush from the surrounding property. She rebuilt broken fencing using fallen timbers. She repaired the storage shed enough to protect the notebook and maps from weather. Every morning, the windmill lifted more water. Every evening, birds gathered around the fresh supply. Then rabbits returned. Coyotes drank cautiously at dawn. Even desert quail appeared among the sage. Life always seemed to discover water before people did. One afternoon, an elderly Paiute traveler named Tomas Gray Elk stopped beside the windmill with 2 exhausted pack mules. He stared silently at the overflowing trough before filling his canteens. I crossed here 30 years ago, he said quietly. This place was alive then? He nodded. Many wagons, many children. What happened? The stories changed. He looked toward the horizon. When enough people repeat a lie, eventually they forget it was ever spoken by someone. Before leaving, he paused. My grandfather spoke of a surveyor who disappeared after refusing to sell a map. Seraphine looked at him sharply. A map? He said, the map showed rivers beneath the sand. She said nothing. Instead, she simply thanked him. His unexpected memory confirmed Nathaniel's account even further. News traveled slowly through desert towns, yet unusual sights always found willing storytellers. Within another fortnight, travelers began stopping simply because they had heard someone restored water at the abandoned windmill. Most filled their flasks and continued onward with grateful smiles. Some offered vegetables, flour, lamp oil, or spare tools in exchange for using the well. Seraphine accepted only what seemed fair. She charged no fee. Nathaniel's words remained clear. Water belonged first to those who thirsted. One evening, a familiar wagon approached beneath a cloud of dust. Calvin Mercer climbed down. He looked older than when he had forced her from her home only weeks before, though his polished boots remained spotless despite the journey. So, he said, surveying the repaired windmill, seems you've made yourself useful. Seraphine remained calm. I've repaired a neglected well. I've heard people talking. His eyes wandered across the tower, the shed, the growing signs of activity. Funny thing about abandoned property. Sometimes folks discover it isn't so worthless after all. She noticed his attention lingering on the water tank, then upon the shed, then upon the satchel where Nathaniel's notebook rested. A quiet uneasiness settled inside her. Mercer smiled too easily. "I wonder," he continued, "whether you found anything else while fixing the place." The desert wind continued turning the great wheel above them, its steady rhythm sounding almost like a warning carried across the lonely valley. Seraphine met his gaze without lowering her own. She had spent too many weeks watching confident men mistake silence for surrender, and she had learned that calmness unsettled them far more than anger ever could. "I found broken boards, rusted gears, and a well everyone forgot," she replied evenly. "Those are enough discoveries for one season." Calvin Mercer smiled, though the expression never reached his eyes. "You always were your father's daughter." Edwin had a habit of believing every old thing deserved another chance. Sometimes they do. He stepped toward the trough where fresh water overflowed into a narrow channel she had dug to nourish a patch of young cottonwood saplings, beginning to push tiny green leaves into the desert air. He dipped his fingers into the water, studying its clarity. Funny thing, folks have started talking about this place again. Wagon trains are stopping here. Ranchers are asking questions. Questions lead to surveys. Surveys lead to claims. And claims can become complicated. Seraphine understood the warning beneath his pleasant voice. "I'm not afraid of complications." Mercer chuckled softly. "No, but perhaps you should be." Without another word, he climbed back into his wagon and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust drifting across the evening light. She watched until he disappeared beyond the low ridge, yet an uneasiness remained. He had not come merely out of curiosity. He had come looking for something specific. That night, Seraphine reread Nathaniel's journal, paying closer attention to every mention of names. Several appeared repeatedly beside suspicious meetings and unexplained delays. One family name stood above the others: Mercer. Not Calvin, who had been a child when Nathaniel disappeared, but Augustus Mercer, his grandfather, listed as one of the investors who purchased thousands of acres immediately after the official report declared the valley hopelessly dry. The realization settled heavily upon her. Calvin had not created the deception. He had inherited it, which meant he likely knew far more than he admitted. The following morning, she saddled the old mule Elias Dunn had loaned her in exchange for helping repair one of his gates, and rode into Dry Mesa Crossing carrying only a copied portion of Nathaniel's notebook rather than the originals. She stopped first at the small church where Reverend Amos Bell welcomed travelers regardless of circumstance. The aging minister had baptized half the town and buried nearly the other half. His quiet honesty had earned respect even among those who rarely attended Sunday services. He listened patiently while Seraphine described repairing the windmill and restoring the well. She did not immediately reveal every detail of Nathaniel's discovery. Instead, she asked a single question. If someone uncovered proof that powerful people lied to an entire community many years ago, who could be trusted with that truth? Reverend Bell folded his hands. Truth is like spring water. Once it begins flowing, no one controls where it travels. The important question is not who deserves to hear it. The important question is whether enough honest people hear it before dishonest ones bury it again. Would you help protect evidence? He looked directly into her eyes, without hesitation. She removed several copied pages from her satchel. His expression changed almost immediately as he recognized survey markings and official commission seals. He read in complete silence until reaching Nathaniel's testimony. Finally, he whispered, "Merciful heavens! You believe it? I recognize the commission seal. I also remember old Nathaniel Ashcombe." Seraphine stared in surprise. "You knew him?" "Only briefly. He disappeared before you were born. Folks said he wandered into the desert and never returned. I never believed it. He possessed too much purpose to simply vanish." Reverend Bell carefully returned the papers. "Make several copies. Leave them with different people. Never allow all the evidence to remain in one place." That advice shaped everything that followed. Over the next several weeks, Seraphine worked quietly rather than dramatically. Each evening, she copied another portion of Nathaniel's records by lamplight until her fingers cramped. One copy remained beneath a loose stone inside the church. Another rested with Elias Dunn. A third she entrusted to Tomas Gray Elk when the traveler passed through again, asking only that he keep it safe until called upon. The originals never left the windmill, hidden within a newly constructed compartment she built inside one of the massive support beams where no casual searcher would think to look. Meanwhile, travelers continued arriving for water. Among them came farmers who spoke of failed wells, widows struggling to keep livestock alive, and families considering leaving the territory altogether. Seraphine listened far more than she spoke. Nathaniel's maps revealed something remarkable. Several neighboring homesteads sat directly above shallow branches of the underground aquifer. With careful drilling, each family might secure reliable water. Yet she refused to reveal the maps too soon. She needed undeniable proof first. Providence arrived unexpectedly through an old engineer named Horace Wilkes, who stopped at the windmill after delivering machinery to a distant mining camp. He spent nearly an hour admiring her repairs before asking permission to inspect the mechanism. "Who taught you this work?" he asked while examining the restored gearbox. "My father. He taught you well." She hesitated before unfolding one of Nathaniel's engineering sketches. Horace adjusted his spectacles and studied it for several long minutes. His weathered hands began trembling. "Do you know what you've got here?" "Only partly. Young lady, this isn't guesswork. These are professional hydrological surveys. Whoever drew these understood groundwater better than most government engineers I've met." He compared the map with the surrounding landscape visible from the tower. "If these measurements remain accurate..." He stopped. "What? This valley has enough water beneath it to change everything." Seraphine finally allowed herself to believe Nathaniel completely. The discovery was real. Yet good news traveled almost as quickly as greed. Only 3 days after Horace departed, unfamiliar riders began appearing around the windmill. They claimed to be hunters. Their saddlebags carried no game. Others pretended to seek directions while carefully studying every building on the property. Twice, Seraphine found footprints circling the storage shed after dark. Someone was searching. She slept lightly with her father's old hammer beside her blanket, though she prayed never to use it against another person. One moonless night, she awoke to the unmistakable sound of boards creaking beneath careful footsteps. She remained perfectly still. Another soft sound came from the shed, then another. Instead of rushing outside, she quietly climbed the windmill tower where the moon briefly emerged between passing clouds. From above, she saw 2 shadowed figures forcing open the shed door. They searched hurriedly, overturning crates, opening cabinets, scattering tools across the floor. They were looking for papers. They remained less than 10 minutes before leaving empty-handed. By dawn, the evidence of their search lay everywhere. Nothing valuable had been stolen. Only documents had interested them. Seraphine gathered the scattered tools calmly. Her precautions had worked. The originals remained hidden safely inside the support beam. Later that same afternoon, Sheriff Gideon Rusk arrived unexpectedly. He dismounted with visible discomfort, removing his hat before speaking. "Miss Holt, I've received complaints." "About what?" "That you've been claiming ownership over government property." She almost smiled. "Government property? That's what was reported." She handed him the faded deed Elias Dunn had signed. The sheriff examined every page carefully before nodding. "Looks legal enough to me." "Then why the complaint?" Gideon sighed. "Because certain influential men don't like seeing people gather here." He lowered his voice. "Between ourselves, I've lived in this county 22 years. This is the first time I've seen water flowing from that old well." He looked toward the busy watering trough where weary travelers filled barrels and canteens. "Seems to me you're helping more people than you're hurting." Before leaving, he leaned closer. "Keep your doors barred at night. Some folks become dangerous when old secrets begin costing them money." And quote. As the sheriff rode away, Seraphine watched the turning windmill cast long moving shadows across the desert floor. She realized the struggle had quietly changed. At first, she had been protecting only herself. Now she was protecting something that belonged to everyone who might someday call the valley home. And somewhere beyond the distant mesas, men who had spent generations profiting from silence were beginning to understand that the forgotten windmill they had ignored for decades had finally found its rightful keeper. In the months that followed, the truth spread across Dry Mesa Crossing, not like wildfire, but like water itself, steady, unstoppable, and impossible to gather back once it had begun to flow. Reverend Amos Bell called a public meeting beneath the cottonwood trees that had already grown taller beside the restored windmill. Families came from every direction, carrying folding stools, lanterns, and quiet curiosity. Sheriff Gideon Rusk stood beside the minister, while Horace Wilkes carefully unrolled Nathaniel Ashcomb's original surveys upon a long wooden table where every citizen could see them with their own eyes. One by one, the copied records were compared. Every map matched, every signature aligned, every measurement confirmed the same astonishing truth. The valley had never been barren, it had been betrayed. For decades, powerful investors had hidden the existence of the underground aquifer so they could quietly purchase enormous tracts of land for almost nothing. The people had not failed the desert. The truth had failed the people. A silence settled over the gathering unlike any Seraphine had ever heard. It was not the silence of hopelessness. It was the silence that comes when a lifetime of lies finally breaks apart beneath undeniable truth. Calvin Mercer stood at the edge of the crowd, his face pale as the evidence passed from hand to hand. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouted accusations, no revenge sought by angry neighbors. Instead, the county judge ordered a formal investigation. Old land transactions were reopened. Witnesses came forward with forgotten letters, faded receipts, and long-buried testimonies that supported Nathaniel's journal. Records that had slept in dusty archives suddenly found new meaning. The deception unraveled thread by thread until even those who had benefited from it could no longer deny what had happened. Calvin Mercer lost every fraudulent claim his family had maintained for generations, including the property stolen from Edwin Holt. The workshop returned to Seraphine exactly as the law should have protected it years before. Yet she did not celebrate by locking its doors behind her. Instead, she reopened it as a place where young men and women alike could learn to repair wagons, pumps, windmills, and farming tools without paying a single dollar if they were willing to work hard and help their neighbors in return. The forgotten windmill remained exactly where it had always stood. Travelers still stopped there first, not because it was mysterious anymore, but because it had become a symbol of honest welcome. More wells were carefully drilled using Nathaniel's surveys, never recklessly, never wastefully, but with respect for the gift hidden beneath the earth. Small farms appeared where only sagebrush had grown. Orchards slowly took root. Children who once expected to leave the valley found reasons to stay. Every new well reminded the people that prosperity shared wisely lasted longer than fortunes hoarded in secret. Elias Dunn lived long enough to watch fields of alfalfa sway where blowing sand had once ruled the landscape. Before his passing, he smiled toward the old windmill and whispered that perhaps abandoned places only waited for abandoned people brave enough to love them again. Tomas Gray Elk returned each spring, bringing young travelers who listened as elders told the story of Nathaniel Ashcombe and the girl who had finished the promise he could not. Reverend Bell often reminded every child born afterward that justice did not always arrive quickly, but when guided by honesty rather than revenge, it left behind something far stronger than punishment. Years later, visitors often asked why the windmill had never been replaced with a newer one. Seraphine would simply smile and rest her hand upon one of its weathered beams, because this one still remembers. The old blades continued turning above the desert, lifting clear water from depths no one could see, just as Edwin Holt had once taught his daughter that the most important work was often invisible. Looking upon the thriving valley, it became almost impossible to imagine the frightened 18-year-old who had arrived carrying only $4.80 wrapped inside a worn handkerchief. Yet she never forgot her first lonely night beneath the water tank. She never forgot the cold wind, the empty pockets, or the choice to believe that something everyone else had dismissed might still possess immeasurable worth. That was the true miracle. Not the maps, not the hidden documents, not even the great aquifer sleeping beneath the desert. The greatest discovery had been the quiet courage to keep looking beneath the surface, when everyone else had already decided there was nothing left to find. Seraphine Holt became known throughout the territory not as the woman who uncovered buried secrets, but as the woman who returned hidden blessings to the people who needed them most. Whenever travelers asked how she had known the abandoned windmill was worth buying, she always answered the same way: "I didn't. I simply believe that forgotten things deserve one honest chance before we call them worthless." Those words traveled farther than any newspaper ever could. Parents repeated them to their children. Craftsmen carved them above workshop doors. Ranchers remembered them whenever drought tested their resolve. Even after Seraphine's hair had turned silver, young apprentices still gathered around her workbench to hear the story of the old surveyor who trusted honesty more than wealth, the father who taught his daughter to look beneath appearances, and the abandoned windmill that had quietly waited for the right pair of hands. The desert itself seemed to agree. Each sunrise painted the turning blades with gold, and each sunset reflected upon waters that had never truly disappeared. They had only been waiting for truth to uncover them. Perhaps that is how hope survives in every generation. It does not vanish. It simply waits beneath the surface until someone refuses to stop searching. Thank you for spending this journey with us. If Seraphine's story reminded you that even the most forgotten places and the most overlooked people can still change the world, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, what is a time you discovered unexpected value in something everyone else had written off? Your story may encourage someone who needs hope today. If you enjoyed this frontier tale of quiet courage, hidden truth, and lasting restoration, please like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another heartfelt journey. Until next time, stay close, keep believing that the greatest treasures are often hidden beneath the surface, and thank you for being part of Berry Tales, where every forgotten story finds its voice.